Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's December 4th. Today, we celebrate one of the first botanists to explore South Carolina and a German botanist who met his end during the 1841 expedition to Niger. We'll learn about the man who discovered why the sky is blue and one of Australia's top garden designers, in addition to the monument to one of Australia's greatest botanical collectors. We'll hear some thoughts on the birds of winter, and we grow that garden library with a book that helps us become a seed starting and saving champion. I'll talk about my favorite brand for wooden plant labels. They come in a pack of 60. And then we'll end today with a garden club story out of Davenport, Iowa. But first, let's catch up on a few recent events. We start out today's curated articles with a story from Central Park. They recently shared a video and an article showing the arborists that are behind Central Park's trees. This was shared on the official website for Central Park, New York City. And when I shared this on Twitter, I said, I think that I shall never see a team as lovely as Central Park, New York City arborists. The video was absolutely fantastic, and I personally learned a ton about all of the work they have to do behind the scenes to maintain all of the trees in Central Park. It's no small undertaking. Anyway, when I shared it with the Facebook group, I said, be sure to bookmark this excellent post. And it has an A+ video. You get to meet the arborists behind and in Central Park's trees. And as we talk to kids about careers in horticulture, arborist needs to be on the list. Another fun post I found was from the blog Bramble Garden. The title of the post caught my eye because it was called Dahlias, Overwintering Dilemmas. And if you're a dahlia lover, that article is going to get your attention. When I shared it in the group, I said, hi, darlings. Here's a great behind-the-scenes post with advice and tips from a dahlia grower and lover, Karen Gempson. And here's just one of her tips. She said, I'll take basil softwood cuttings when shoots are 1 inch tall. Cuttings will make good-sized tubers and will flower in one season. Excellent tip. And she has a lot of other ones in that post as well. So be sure to check it out. If you're in the Facebook group, just search for Dahlia, and this post will pop right up. Finally, the last post that I wanted to share with you today was from Plant Life, and it had to do with the mission to save the gin plant, which is, of course, the juniper. There's a new recipe for success for how to bring the junipers back into a thriving plant community. This article is especially great news for junipers, and it's a fascinating post because, as I learned from the article, the battle with junipers really begins at birth. Juniper seeds require 2 winters before they even germinate, and seedlings then require very specific conditions to grow. And if they survive their childhood, it takes another 10 years or more before these teenagers mature and then begin producing those lovely gin-flavored berries. And after I read this article, I wrote, I'll never look at gin the same way. Anyway, I'm glad that they're experiencing some success with this mission of cultivating juniper species. That's fantastic news. Now, if you'd like to check out these curated articles for yourself, you're in luck because I share all of it in the listener community for the show. It's a free Facebook group that you can join as well. All you have to do is the next time you're in Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, and then our group will pop right up, and then you can request to join. I'll admit you and I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. On this day in 1788, André Michaux made his way from Georgia into South Carolina by crossing the Tugaloo River. In his journal, Michaux wrote, "At dawn, I went to look at the banks of the river, and I recognized the yellow root and a new species of rhododendron, mountain laurel, hydrangea, and hemlock spruce." And Harvard's Charles Sprague Sargent concluded this was the moment. It was the first time that Michaux laid eyes on the rhododendron minus. The rhododendron minus grows naturally in Tennessee, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, all along the streams and rocky ridges. 4 years after first seeing it, André Michaux described the rhododendron minus in detail. He called it the minus because minus means smaller, and because of its smaller sized leaves compared to the rhododendron maximum, which of course has bigger leaves. And then on this day in 1841, the German botanist Theodore Vogel was laid low with dysentery. Vogel was botanizing in Niger after joining the Niger expedition in May of that year. By August, Vogel had recorded the hardships of traveling by naval warship in his journal, and I found this completely fascinating. Here's what it said. As soon as I got on board the Wilberforce, my first care was to shift my entire collection, especially the plants gathered since we arrived at Cape Coast Castle. But though I had taken all possible care, much was spoiled and almost everything in a bad state. It has been my lot that after endless labor, I could only get together ill-conditioned plants, for dampness and want of room are obstacles impossible to be overcome. I mention this on purpose that in case my collection comes into other hands, I may not be accused of negligence. I have sacrificed every convenience to gain room and spared no trouble to overcome the dampness of the ship and of the atmosphere, but without success. The general arrangements of a man of war do not give much opportunity for such experiments. When will the time arrive that expeditions whose result must depend on the observations of naturalists will afford them from the outset the appropriate and necessary support? At present, the vessels are fitted up for other purposes, and it is left to chance to discover a little nook for the philosopher. I was now obliged to devote the 2 days remaining, which we spent at Accra, to the drawing of my collection, that all might not be lost. When Vogel became sick on this day in 1841, his friend and fellow German, the mineralogist Charles Gottfried Roscher, tended to him for 13 days and never left his bedside. On December 17th, about midday, Vogel asked his friend if everything was ready for their excursion, and then a few minutes later, he peacefully passed away. And today is the anniversary of the death of the Irish experimental physicist John Tyndall, who died on this day in 1893. Tyndall made discoveries in the field of infrared radiation, including discovering the link between atmospheric CO2 and what is now known as the greenhouse effect in 1859. Today, we know that a female scientist named Eunice Foote was actually the first to discover the effect 3 years before Tyndall in 1856. That said, Tyndall is best known for learning why the sky is blue. It turns out that light scattering through molecules suspended in the atmosphere creates the color, which is sometimes referred to as Tyndall blue. And as all gardeners know, there's nothing more beautiful than the garden set against the backdrop of a brilliant blue sky. John Tyndall is one of Ireland's most successful scientists and educators. And today is the birthday of the charismatic Australian gardener, designer, and writer Edna Walling, who was born on this day in 1896. Edna created some gorgeous gardens in Australia, and she's remembered for her wonderful books on gardening and landscaping. Edna worked nonstop for 4 decades between the 1920s and the 1960s, creating over 300 gardens. Many Australians regard her as the greatest landscape designer that Australia has ever known. Her books and garden designs continue to be an inspiration. Edna was a conservationist at heart, and Edna was ahead of her time. She advocated for the use of native plants, which were naturally drought hardy, a must for the harsh climate of Australia. And given her pragmatism, Edna naturally preferred perennials over annuals. She wrote about the backlash that she received from a friend in November of 1941. Here's what she wrote. I got a letter from a friend the other day who addressed me, Dear Anti-Annual. Ooh, what have I said? Something rude about Iceland poppies or asters? How narrow-minded of me. If you can't grow them yourself, you needn't be snippy about them, she thinks. It was Edna Walling who said, Nature is our greatest teacher. Edna's work and legacy were brought to light by Peter Watts, who wrote about Edna as part of his thesis in college. The paper became the basis for a book that was published by the National Trust, and it fueled Peter's love for historic gardens. In an article for theplanthunter.com by Georgina Reed, Watts said that Walling would be regarded now as a bit old-fashioned. She was a gardener's designer, a brilliant plantswoman who understood the subtleties of gardening and design, and that Edna always thought gardens should be just a bit bigger than they needed so that you couldn't control them entirely. Ugh, I love that. And on this day in 1897, executors for the botanist Baron von Müller's estate posted a request for donations in the newspaper. The plan was to raise money for a monument over von Müller's grave in the St. Hilda Cemetery in Melbourne. 4 years later, by the end of November in 1901, newspapers announced that the monument was unveiled at a small ceremony with friends and government officials. The effort to establish the monument had been led by Müller's friend, Reverend Potter. Potter recalled that Müller had expressly desired that only wildflowers and grasses should grow upon his grave until such time as a worthy monument could be erected. Müller's monument is a tall stone obelisk topped with an urn. A copper medallion shows his profile, and the inscription on the monument ends with these words by Friedrich Schiller, the Baron's favorite poet. Despair not. There are still noble hearts that glow for the august and sublime. In Unearthed Words, the American naturalist Edwin Way Teale has given us some marvelous prose about birds and winter in his books. During World War II, Teal's son David was killed in Germany. Teal and his wife began traveling across the country by automobile. The trips helped them cope with their grief and became an integral part of Teal's writing. Their 1947 journey, covering 17,000 miles in a black Buick and following the unfolding of spring, led to Teal's book, North with the Spring. Additional road trips led to more books, Journey into Summer, Autumn Across America, and Wandering Through Winter. Wandering Through Winter won the Pulitzer Prize in 1966. So here are some of Teal's thoughts on winter and birds. The dead of winter. How much more dead it would be each year without the birds. On the roughest days of winter, when life seems overwhelmed by storm and cold, watch a chickadee, observe in good cheer, and take heart. Bluebird, one of the loveliest manifestations of the color blue. My favorite Edwin Way Teal quote honors his thoughts about life. They're especially poignant when one thinks that he wrote them after losing his son. How strangely inaccurate it is to measure the length of living by length of life. The space between your birth and death is often far from a true measure of your days of living. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Starting and Saving Seeds by Julie Thompson Adolph. The subtitle to this book is Grow the Perfect Vegetables, Fruits, Herbs, and Flowers for Your Garden. Julie's book is a great gift for anyone who wants to start growing plants from seed. It's a whole nother world, and it can be scary for gardeners to attempt starting and saving seeds on their own. I get it. Well, here's why Julie's book is a great guide for you. She gets it. She totally relates to the newbie seed starter anxieties and questions around this topic. And best of all, she's 100% approachable. As she says in the introduction of her book, think of me as your new friend or the neighbor next door who loves to garden. Together, we'll banish any fears of failure and create a beautiful, healthy, delicious, self-sufficient garden from seed. Awesome. So now that intimidation is off the table, let Julie walk you through how to handle bigger challenges like dealing with seeds that are stubborn germinators, seeds that I call Terminator germinators, and even better, Julie recognizes that not everyone wants to set up shop indoors. So if you don't want to have grow lights or if you have limited space, let Julie teach you how to seed outdoors because direct sowing just couldn't be simpler. Did someone say zinnias? Better yet, as your confidence grows, let Julie convince you of the many benefits of starting plants from seeds, the cost savings, the increased variety options, and the appreciation factor. When you start a plant from seed, you really appreciate the entire life cycle of the plant, and that deepens your total understanding of the garden. Today's recommended holiday gift for gardeners is the Home Note 60-piece set of bamboo plant labels. They're 6 centimeters by 10 centimeters. They come with a little pin, and the entire set is just $12.99. Now, what I like about them is that they're wood. They look natural, and they look fantastic in your containers. If you're going to use them indoors, No problem. They're going to last and they're going to do exactly what you want them to do. If you're going to use them outside, what I do is I use a Sharpie marker and then I spray the plant label with polyurethane to seal in my label. And I'm going to do that probably at least a couple of times throughout the summer just to keep them looking smart. So again, this is a 60-piece set. You get 60 plant labels. They're 100% natural bamboo. And if you don't want to label your plants with them, you could use them to write a short message or a poem or some wording, whatever you like. Now, you can get the Home Note plant labels and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for under $13. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. On this day in 1930, the Quad City Times shared a sweet little update from the garden department of the Davenport Women's Club. I love reading little stories like this. Here's what it said. The group added a special holiday gesture to its December program this morning at the Davenport Municipal Art Gallery when the Seed and Bulb Committee, composed of E.A. Johnson and Mrs. R.E. Albrecht, presented each member with a dainty Christmas package in bright-hued Christmas wrappings containing seeds for next spring's sowing. 50 seed packages and 10 sacks of dahlia bulbs went to the women who attended. But that's not all. Their education program was spot on. Listen to this. Mrs. Charles Irwin spoke on the Arnold Arboretum and its former keeper, the late Ernest Henry Wilson, who passed away in October and who was known as Chinese Wilson from his travels and long residence in China. Mrs. P.T. Burroughs suggested that the department send to the new keeper and ask for seeds from rare plants to be used in Davenport gardens and public parks as experimental plantings on the Mississippi Valley region. And then Mrs. Matilda Kohler spoke on famous gardens. And she also paid a tribute to the late John Temple, who was a well-known florist of Davenport, and then told of the lilac tree, which he had planted in her garden, this being one of only a few in the city. And finally, Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Castling gave songs to the accompaniment of Miss Lois McDermott at the piano, and decorations were of prettily trimmed Christmas trees. Now that's a meeting. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow. His friend and traveling companion, the mineralogist. His friend and Charles Gottfried Roscher. The dead of winter. How much more dead would it be?